Pay attention to the ruins standing against the hillside. Look past the overgrown weeds and the garbage piling up in what used to be a fountain. Focus on the color. It is a shocking, vibrant pink. A color you might associate with a dollhouse or a sweet shop. But in the outskirts of Culiacán, Sinaloa, this specific shade of pink does not mean innocence. It means power. It means silence. And it means death. This is the Pink Mansion. For years, it was the domestic throne of Joaquín Guzmán Loera, El Chapo. The most notorious drug lord in modern history. To the locals, this building is a ghost. A physical scar on the landscape that reminds them of a time when one man was more powerful than the state. But if you look closer, if you could peel back the rotting plaster and look into the darkness of the basement, you would find that this isn't just a story about drugs or money. It is a story about the people who entered these pink walls and never walked out. After this moment, we descend into the secrets the jungle is trying to swallow. To understand why this rotting mansion stands as a monument to terror, we have to look away from the ruins for a moment. We have to look at the soil it stands on. Sinaloa. This is the Golden Triangle, a region of Mexico where the geography itself conspires to hide secrets. The mountains here are steep, the heat is suffocating, and for generations, the only crop that paid a living wage was illegal. Joaquín Guzmán Loera didn't start in a mansion. It started in the dirt. Born in 1957 pulgadas La Tuna, Badiraguato, his world was defined by extreme, grinding poverty. There was no government, no running water, no hope. Used the poppy fields and the marijuana plants. Most boys who grow up in the Sierra Madre have two choices: live and starve, or stay and work the fields. But Joaquín was different. He possessed a terrifying kind of genius. He wasn't just a thug, he was a logistician. A savant of supply chains. By 15, he wasn't just carrying backpacks of weed through the mountains, he was mapping routes in his head that no satellite could see. He learned a crucial lesson early on, one that would eventually lay the foundation for the Pink Mansion. He learned that violence is necessary, yes, but corruption is efficient. Violence is loud. Corruption is quiet. And El Chapo liked the quiet. By his 20s, he was moving product for Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, the godfather of the Mexican trade. But while other traffickers were buying gold pistols and making noise in nightclubs, El Chapo was obsessed with efficiency. He earned his nickname Shorty not just for his stature, but for the short time it took him to move cocaine from the Colombian border to the American nose. When the old empire fractured in the late 80s, Chapo didn't just take a piece of the pie. He redesigned the bakery. He weaponized the border. He dug the first tunnels. And by the mid-90s, the boy from the dirt had become a billionaire. He needed a headquarters. He needed a throne room. But he didn't want to hide in a cave anymore. He wanted to hide in plain sight. 1994. The year the first shovel broke ground in Culiacán. The location was chosen with the precision of a military strategist. It wasn't in a slum. It wasn't in the remote mountains. It was in a respectable, upper-class neighborhood. The neighbors were doctors, lawyers, local politicians. People who valued privacy. People who knew when to look away. El Chapo's vision was audacious. He wanted to build a palace that screamed "I am untouchable," yet operated with the stealth of a submarine. The land purchase was a masterclass in money laundering. Silk companies owned by other shell companies registered the names of people who didn't exist or had been dead for years. By the time the paperwork was filed, the trail was so cold not even the Mexican treasury could follow it. The construction took 2 years. The finest architects in Sinaloa were summoned. They were paid in cash, often carrying duffel bags heavy with pesos out of meetings. They were given blueprints that seemed normal at first glance: a large family home, neoclassical columns, a pool. But then, the requests would change. Thicken the walls, the orders would come. Reinforce the foundation. We need a basement. A deep basement. 4. Storage. The laborers were brought in from outside the city. Some rumors say they were brought in blindfolded. They worked shifts around the clock. They poured concrete that was thicker than a bank vault. They installed steel reinforcements in the window frames. And then, the paint. That's a pink, aggressive pink. It wasn't a subtle choice. It was a brand. In Culiacán, everyone knew that color. You could see it from blocks away. It was a beacon. It said, I am here. I am watching. And I am not afraid. But the true genius of the pink mansion wasn't what you could see from the street. It was the deception built into its very bones. The perimeter walls were 3 meters high, topped with wrought iron that looked decorative but was sharpened to razor points. Cameras, state-of-the-art for the 90s, monitored every inch of the sidewalk. Inside the house, a command center monitored those feeds 24 hours a day. The security guards were not retired cops or mall rent-a-cops. They were cartel soldiers. Men trained in guerrilla warfare, standing quietly by the rose bushes with automatic weapons concealed under loose-fitting shirts. When the mansion was finished in 1996, it stood as a paradox. It was a party house, a family home, and a military bunker all wrapped in a candy-colored shell. It was the physical manifestation of El Chapo's power, the ability to force the abnormal to seem normal. But as the neighbors would soon find out, the construction noise was nothing compared to the sounds that would eventually emanate from the property at night. The heavy trucks arriving at 3 de la mañana, the music that never stopped. And the feeling, heavy in the air, at the basement went much deeper than the blueprints ever showed. Step inside. Imagine the heavy, hand-carved mahogany doors swinging open. The year is 1998. The air conditioning is blasting, a sharp contrast to the humid Sinaloa heat outside. The interior was an assault on the senses. It was the definition of narco-baroque. It was luxury without taste, spending without restraint. The floors were Italian marble, laid out in dizzying black and white geometric patterns that seemed to stretch on forever. The staircases were curved iron and imported wood, the banisters rumored to be plated in gold leaf. Everything was designed to intimidate. The chandeliers were massive, dripping with European crystal, costing more than the lifetime earnings of the farmers harvesting Chapo's crops in the mountains. The furniture was a confused mix of styles, Louis XV chairs sitting next to massive, black leather Italian sofas. It looked less like a home and more like a museum of stolen wealth. El Chapo's master suite occupied a quarter of the second floor. The bed was custom-made. King size wasn't enough, it had to be imperial. But the true excess was in the bathroom. A jacuzzi tub big enough for 6 people. A shower system that could simulate tropical rain. Mirrors everywhere, reflecting the golden faucets, creating an infinite loop of opulence. This was where he held court. The parties at the Pink Mansion are the stuff of local legend. We aren't talking about backyard barbecues. We are talking about festivals. The most famous bands in Mexico, Los Tucanes de Tijuana, Los Tigres del Norte, were hired to play private concerts in the garden. They played for hours, singing narco corridos, ballads that glorified the very men sitting in the front row, sipping expensive scotch. Alcohol flowed like water. Trucks would arrive delivering cases of 30-year-old whiskey and tequila that wasn't available for export. Food was prepared by armies of chefs. And the guests. It was a who's who of Culiacán's elite. But it wasn't just criminals. That is the uncomfortable truth. The guests included legitimate businessmen, police commanders, local judges. They came to kiss the ring. They came to drink the scotch. They came because being invited to the Pink Mansion wasn't just a social event, it was a career necessity. If you wanted a permit approved, you came to the party. If you wanted your stolen car returned, you came to the party. If you wanted to run for office, you absolutely came to the party. The mansion functioned as a shadow city hall. Deals were cut on the leather sofas. LINCs were forged over shrimp cocktails. Envelopes thick with cash changed hands in the library, right under the gaze of questionable oil paintings. But amidst the music and the laughter, there was always a current of fear. Everyone knew the rules. You didn't ask questions. You didn't wander down the wrong hallway. And you certainly never, ever asked about the ventilation system that hummed a little too loudly, pulling air from deep underground. Because while the party raged upstairs, the house was working downstairs, but to truly understand the Pink Mansion, you have to ignore the chandeliers. You have to ignore the marble floors. You have to go down. El Chapo wasn't just a drug lord, he was an engineer of evasion. Throughout his career, his signature wasn't the bullet, it was the tunnel. He had used them to move tons of cocaine under the border fences of Arizona and California. Now, he was using that same technology to turn his home into a magic trick. The official blueprints filed with the Culiacán municipality showed a standard basement. A place for laundry, a water heater, perhaps a wine cellar. It was a lab built on paper. The reality was a marvel of clandestine engineering. Rumors have circulated for decades, but it wasn't until later investigations that the full scope became clear. Hidden behind a heavy shelving unit in a lower utility room, a unit that opened only with a hydraulic mechanism triggered by a hidden switch under a bathroom sink, was the entrance to the underworld. These weren't dirt holes. These were reinforced corridors, lit by industrial lighting, ventilated by silent fans. They were the veins of the beast. One passage reportedly connected directly to the city's storm drainage system. It was an escape hatch that allowed Chapo to vanish into the bowels of the city at a moment's notice. While police might be battering down the front door, shouting orders and clearing rooms, the target could be half a mile away, emerging from a manhole cover in a different neighborhood, stepping into a waiting car before the first officer even reached the master bedroom. Neighbors spoke of strange vibrations at night during the construction years. The low, grinding hum of machinery that seemed to come from beneath the earth. They learned to ignore it. In Culiacán, ignoring the strange noises wasn't just polite, it was a survival strategy. But the tunnels weren't just for escape. They were for transport. Witnesses from the neighborhood, speaking years later, voice altered and in shadow, described the trucks. Heavy-duty cargo trucks that would reverse into the mansion's secure garage in the dead of night. The gates would close. The engines would cut. And then, the sounds of unloading would begin. Sometimes, it was cash. Packets of it. Vacuumsealed US dollars, the lifeblood of the cartel, returning home to be counted and laundered. But sometimes, the cargo was heavier. And sometimes, the cargo moved on its own. This brings us to the darkest secret of the Pink Mansion. The detail that turns this story from a crime drama into a horror film. Deep within the modified basement, past the laundry, past the wine storage, there was a specific room. It does not appear on any registry. It was not designed for storage. According to whistleblowers and intelligence gathered years later, this room was soundproofed. The walls were lined with acoustic foam, the kind used in recording studios, but covered with industrial plastic. The floor was concrete, sloped gently toward a central drain. A single, heavy steel door locked from the outside. This was the office. El Chapo viewed himself as a CEO. It preferred negotiation. It preferred bribery. But when an associate stole from the company? When a rival refused to bend the knee? When a police commander took the silver but still tried to deliver the lead? They were invited to the Pink Mansion. They would enter through the front door, admiring the gold leaf and the crystal chandeliers. They would drink the 30-year-old scotch. And then, they would be escorted downstairs. The neighbors knew. Not explicitly, they didn't see the bodies. But humans have instincts that go back to the Stone Age. We know when a predator is feeding. Residents reported strange smells drifting over the high perimeter walls on hot, humid nights. Not the smell of decay, that would be too obvious. It was the smell of chemicals. Industrial bleach. Ammonia. Acids. The sharp, stinging scent of a deep clean happening at 3 de la mañana. And then, there were the sounds. Even with the soundproofing, sound travels through solid structures. Vibrations move through foundations. A neighbor, who moved away in 2002, described hearing muffled thuds coming from the ground. It sounded like someone dropping a sack of cement, he said. Over and over again. But rhythmic. Like a hammer. He never called the police. Who would he call? The police were likely parking their patrol cars in the mansion's driveway, collecting their envelopes. This room represents the duality of El Chapo. Upstairs, he was the charismatic host, the family man bouncing his children on his knee. Downstairs, beneath the very floor where his children played, he was the judge, jury, and executioner. This compartment, this soundproof void, is the anchor of our story. It is the physical manifestation of the cartel's ultimate power, the power to make a human being cease to exist, without a scream ever being heard by the outside world. Block 6, The Eye of the Storm, Daily Operations. Narrator. While the basement held the horror, the upper floors held the bureaucracy. Managing the Sinaloa cartel in the late 90s was a logistical challenge that rivaled running Amazon or FedEx. We are talking about moving tons of narcotics across international borders, coordinating fleets of airplanes, submarines, and tractor-trailers, and managing billions of dollars in cash flow. The Pink Mansion was the nerve center. In his second-floor office, surrounded by questionable art and family photos, Chapo worked with the discipline of a workaholic executive. He didn't just sit back and count money. He was obsessed with details. He had a photographic memory for the ledger. He knew exactly how many kilos were in a shipment moving through Juarez. He knew the names of the pilots flying Cessnas into clandestine airstrips in the Arizona desert. He knew which border patrol agents were on the payroll and which shifts they worked. The mansion was equipped with satellite phones and encrypted radios. Long before the era of smartphones and signal, Chapo was using complex communication networks to stay ahead of the DEA. His day began at 6 de la mañana. He would review reports from his plaza bosses, the regional managers of his empire. He approved bribes. He ordered hits. He negotiated prices with Colombian suppliers. All from the comfort of his living room, often while wearing slippers. The domestic staff lived in a state of terrified obedience. The maids who dusted the Louis XV furniture knew to never look at the papers left on the desk. The cooks knew that if a meeting was happening in the dining room, they were to stay in the kitchen, deaf and blind to the world. They were paid well. Exceptionally well. A maid at the Pink Mansion could earn in a month what a factory worker earned in a year. But the money came with a golden handcuff. You could never leave. You could never talk. Your loyalty was not purchased, it was held hostage. One story tells of a gardener who was fired. It wasn't just let go. It was escorted to the gate by armed guards, given a bag of cash, and told that if he was ever seen in Culiacán again, they wouldn't just kill him, they would kill his entire family tree. He moved to the other side of the country the next day. How did he do it? How does a man on the FBI's most wanted list live in a bright pink mansion in the middle of a city? The answer lies in the halcones, the falcons. This was Chapo's external security ring. It wasn't just guards at the gate. It was a human radar system. 3 blocks away, a teenager selling gum on the corner was watching traffic. 2 streets over, a taxi driver who never seemed to pick up passengers was monitoring the radio. An old woman selling tamales by the park was counting police cars. Every approach to the Pink Mansion was monitored by 3 or 4 layers of human surveillance. If a federal police convoy left the station in downtown Culiacán, Chapo knew about it before they turned the first corner. He had bought the ultimate luxury, time. If a raid was triggered, a rare occurrence in those protected years, the phone in the mansion would ring. "The weather is changing," a voice would say. That was the code. Chapo wouldn't panic. He wouldn't run out the back door like a common thief. He would calmly finish his drink. He would walk to the bathroom, trigger the hydraulic switch, and descend into the cool, lit tunnel. By the time the authorities breached the gate, often deliberately stalling to give him that extra margin, the Pink Mansion was empty. The coffee on the desk would still be warm. For years, this system was flawless. The mansion became a symbol not just of wealth, but of invincibility. It stood there, bright and loud, mocking the very concept of law enforcement. But arrogance is a slow poison. And as the new millennium dawned, the geopolitical winds were shifting. The Americans were getting impatient. The Mexican government was under pressure to show results. The era of the untouchable drug lord living in a palace was coming to an end. The shadows were getting longer, and even the brightest pink paint couldn't hide the rot setting into the foundation. The year 2006 marked the end of the party. When President Felipe Calderón took office, he declared a total war on the cartels. He didn't just send police, he sent the military. Tanks on the streets. Black Hawk helicopters in the air. For the first time, the halcones on the street corners weren't enough. El Chapo, ever the survivor, read the writing on the wall. The Pink Mansion, once his greatest symbol of strength, had become his biggest target. It was too visible. Too loud. He didn't move out in a panic. He didn't flee in the night with sirens wailing behind him. It was a strategic withdrawal. The staff was let go with heavy envelopes of cash and heavier threats of silence. The computers were wiped and removed. The ledgers were burned. But the house itself remained. For a few years, it sat in a strange limbo. It was a safe house that was no longer safe. Occasionally, trucks would still arrive at night to move assets, but the lights were off. The music had stopped. The neighbors noticed the silence. In the world of the cartel, silence is often more terrifying than noise. Then came February 2014. The Gargoyle Operation. Chapo was captured in a condominium in Mazatlán, not Culiacán. But the shockwave of his arrest shattered the protective bubble around his properties. The government, eager to show a victory, moved to seize assets. The Pink Mansion was seized. Tape was put across the doors. Federal agents stood guard. But in Mexico, seized often means forgotten. The legal system fell into a paralysis of bureaucracy. Who actually owned the land? The shell companies were a maze of dead ends. While lawyers argued in air-conditioned courtrooms in Mexico City, the mansion in Culiacán was left to die. When the federal police eventually stopped guarding the perimeter, funds ran dry, or priorities shifted, the scavengers moved in. It started small. Local kids jumping the fence on a dare. But soon, professional looters realized that the government wasn't watching. They came like termites. First, the furniture went. The Louis XV chairs, the black leather sofas. Then the electronics. Then, the fixtures. Imagine the scene, men with sledgehammers and crowbars working under the cover of darkness, ripping imported Italian marble off the floors. They tore the copper wiring out of the walls like veins from a body. They dismantled the bathroom fixtures. That gold-plated jacuzzi? It was likely cut into pieces and sold for scrap metal. The mansion was stripped to its concrete skeleton. The pink paint began to peel in great, sunburned sheets, revealing the gray industrial brick underneath. The jungle, which had been manicured into submission by armies of gardeners, declared its revenge. Viñas choked the neoclassical columns. The pool turned into a toxic, green swamp, breeding mosquitoes and carrying the stench of stagnation. It was no longer a palace. It was a carcass. For 2 years, the house sat rotting. But in 2016, something happened that brought the terror back to the surface. A group of urban explorers, YouTubers specializing in breaking into abandoned places, decided to film the Pink Mansion. They wanted views. They wanted to touch the legend. What they found was not just ruin. The footage is shaky. The lighting is poor, coming from flashlights that cut through the dust motes. You can hear their heavy breathing, the crunch of broken glass under their boots. They walk through the empty main hall, graffiti covering the walls where all paintings once hung. "Look at this," one of them whispers. "It's huge." They descend into the basement. This is where the narrative shifts. As they explored the lower levels, the laundry area, the utility rooms, one of them noticed a discrepancy in the wall. The concrete looked newer. Different. Using a crowbar found in the rubble, they pried at a section of drywall that seemed hollow. Behind it, they didn't find wiring. They found a door. Not a wooden door. A heavy, industrial steel door. The video shows them pushing it open. The hinges scream in the silence. Inside, the flashlights reveal a small, windowless room. The walls are covered in what looks like degraded acoustic foam. The floor is stained concrete with a central drain. But it's what is on the floor that stops them cold. The camera zooms in scratches. Deep, frantic gouges in the concrete. And set into the floor, rusted but unmistakable, an iron ring. The kind you use to chain something down. Or someone. "No mames," one of the explorers whispers. "Don't touch anything." The atmosphere in the video changes instantly. The bravado is gone. They realize they weren't in a house anymore. They were in a crime scene. A torture chamber that the authorities had either missed or ignored. They fled the property. The video was uploaded days later. It went viral instantly. The secret torture room of El Chapo. The reaction from the authorities was swift and suspicious. Within 48 hours of the video trending, the property was surrounded again. Not by looters, but by police. The explorers were threatened with trespassing charges. State equipment was confiscated. An official statement was released. The government spokesperson called the video a fabrication. They claimed the room was a storage locker for valuables. The ring in the floor? For securing a safe. The acoustic foam? Insulation for a wine cellar. They tried to gaslight an entire nation. But the locals knew. The people who lived on that street, who had heard the muffled thuds in the night years ago, they watched the video and they nodded. They knew what a storage locker looked like. And they knew that you don't soundproof a room to keep your wine bottles quiet. The government quickly moved to seal the breach. The entrance to the basement was filled with concrete. New locks were put on the gates. The mansion was put under 24-hour surveillance again, not to keep people safe from the cartel, but to keep the public safe from the truth. This incident proved that the Pink Mansion wasn't just a building. It was a vault of secrets that powerful people, politicians, commanders, maybe even rivals who had taken over, desperately wanted to keep closed. Because if that room was investigated, if forensic luminol was sprayed on those concrete floors, whose DNA would light up in the dark? Maybe a rival drug lord. Maybe a missing journalist. Maybe a police officer who said no. The mansion had been stripped of its gold, but it kept its ghost status. So, what do you do with a monument to a monster? In Germany, they tore down the bunkers. In Colombia, they dynamited the Monaco building, Pablo Escobar's fortress, to purge the city of his memory. But in Mexico, the Pink Mansion sits in a state of paralysis that mirrors the country's own struggle with its history. For years, the federal government tried to figure out how to monetize the seizure. They viewed it as an asset. A line item on a spreadsheet. There were proposals to sell it. Real estate agents were quietly contacted. They walked the property, stepping over the piles of bad guano and broken glass, trying to calculate the price per square foot. But how do you price a house where the walls might be filled with recording devices? How do you write a listing for a property that includes a soundproof room with a drain in the floor? It has great bones, an agent might say. But everyone in Culiacán knew those bones were metaphorical and, quite possibly, literal. No buyer came forward. To buy the pink mansion was to paint a target on your own back. It was to invite the Sinaloa cartel to knock on your door and ask why you were sleeping in their boss's bedroom. Then came the idea of the grand raffle. The government proposed raffling off seized narco properties to the public. A lottery ticket could win you a mansion. It was presented as Robin Hood justice, taking from the criminals to give to the people. But the people of Sinaloa aren't naive. They looked at the pink mansion and they didn't see a prize. They saw a curse. Winning that house wouldn't be a blessing, it would be a death sentence. The initiative stalled, choked by the reality that some stains cannot be washed away with a lottery ticket. While the bureaucrats in Mexico City debated spreadsheets, the people living on that street in Culiacán were left living next to a corpse. Imagine living next door. You are a dentist, or a teacher. You worked hard to buy a home in a good neighborhood. And now, your view is a rotting, graffiti-covered ruin that attracts vandals, rats, and memories you are trying to forget. Property values in the immediate vicinity plummeted. Who wants to raise their children next to a house that tourists visit to take selfies with a crime scene? The neighbors live in a state of enforced silence. When interviewed, they speak in code. They don't say Chapo, they say the neighbor. They don't say cartel, they say those people. One woman, an elderly resident who has lived on the street since the 80s, put it simply, the house is like a cancer. The tumor has been cut out, but the wound won't close. We smell the rot every day. They watch as the jungle reclaims the land. They watch the black SUVs that sometimes still slow down as they pass the house, men in sunglasses paying respects, or perhaps checking to make sure the secrets are still buried. The mansion has become a dark tourist destination. Taxi drivers offer unauthorized tours. Want to see where the boss lived? They ask Americans and Europeans looking for a thrill. They drive by, point at the peeling pink paint, and tell tall tales about tigers in the garden and piles of gold in the walls. They turn a tragedy into a sideshow. This is where the story demands a correction. Because while Netflix series and narco corridos turned the pink mansion into a symbol of rebellious glamour, a testament to a poor boy who beat the system, the reality is written in the dirt of the Sinaloa desert. While Chapo was sleeping in his air-conditioned master suite with gold faucets, thousands of mothers were walking through the scrubland with shovels. These are the madres buscadoras, the searching mothers. Women who lost sons and daughters to the machinery that built the pink mansion. They don't have tunnels. They don't have bribes. They have iron rods they push into the earth, smelling the tip for the scent of death. For every marble tile in that mansion, there is a missing student. For every crystal in the chandelier, there is a police officer who was tortured for doing his job. For every bottle of 30-year-old scotch poured at those legendary parties, there is a family that was forced to flee their home at gunpoint. The pink mansion is not a symbol of success. It is a monument to theft. It represents the theft of safety, the theft of rule of law, and the theft of a generation of Mexican youth. The graffiti on the walls today reflects this war. Next to a tag glorifying JGL, Joaquín Guzmán lo era, someone else has spray-painted in angry red letters, ¿Dónde están? Where are they? It is a question the house refuses to answer. The ruin stands as a battleground between two Mexicos. The Mexico that glamorizes the violent power of the chief, and the Mexico that is bleeding to death because of it. And as the roof finally begins to cave in, bringing tons of concrete crashing down into the grand foyer, it feels less like an architectural failure and more like a moral judgment. Gravity, finally, is doing what the justice system could not. While the pink mansion slowly dissolves into the Sinaloa hillside, the man who built it sits in a very different kind of structure. Today, Joaquín Guzmán Loera resides in ADX Florence, Colorado. The Alcatraz of the Rockies. It is the most secure supermax prison on earth. There are no tunnels here. There are no corrupted guards to look the other way. There are no parties with bands playing until dawn. He spends 23 hours a day in a soundproof concrete cell that measures 7 by 12 feet. It is a cruel, poetic irony. He spent his life building soundproof rooms to silence others. Now, he is trapped in one himself. He spent his career digging tunnels to cross borders. Now, he will never cross the threshold of his cell door without shackles. The contrast is devastating. In Culiacán, he had gold faucets and an infinite view of his dominion. In Florence, his only view is a sliver of sky through a slit window designed to prevent him from knowing where he is within the facility. He famously complained to his lawyers that the tap water in prison hurts his throat and that the silence is driving him mad. The same silence he imposed on Culiacán for decades has finally come for him. His empire continues, fractured and violent, run by his sons and former rivals. The business of drugs didn't stop because the CEO was fired. But the era of the pink mansion, the era of the untouchable, celebrity drug lord living in a candy-colored palace in the middle of the city, that era died with his extradition. Back in Culiacán, nature is performing the final demolition that the government was too paralyzed to authorize. Recent drone footage of the site shows the roof of the main hall has finally caved in. The heavy clay tiles, once imported at great expense, lie shattered on the marble floors below. Sunlight now streams into the secure bunker, bleaching the moldy walls. The jungle has breached the perimeter. Roots from massive fig trees are cracking the foundation, slowly tearing the steel-reinforced concrete apart. The pool is no longer green, it is black, filled with earth and debris. The halcones are gone from the street corners. The black SUVs no longer slow down. The legend is being eaten by the insects and the rain. In 10 years, maybe 20, there won't be a mansion left. There will just be a mound of pink-tinted rubble in the jungle. A geological curiosity. A strange hill where the grass grows a little too green, fed by soil that holds too many secrets. The story of the pink mansion is not a tragedy of architecture. It is a tragedy of a nation. It stands as a physical proof of what happens when ambition is divorced from morality. It is a monument to a time when a man could buy a city, but couldn't buy peace. For the families of the missing, the ruin offers no closure, only a bitter reminder. For the people of Culiacán, it is a scar that is slowly fading, but still aches when the weather changes. Ultimately, the pink mansion failed in its primary purpose. It was built to project immortality. It was built to say, "I will be here forever." Instead, it says the opposite. It screams that power built on fear is biodegradable. That no amount of concrete, steel, or bribe money can stop the clock. Joaquín Guzmán Loera wanted to leave a pyramid. He left a ruin. Pay attention to the silence now. It's not the silence of fear anymore. It's the silence of a grave. And in the end, that is all the pink mansion ever really was. A very expensive, very pink tomb, waiting for a body that would never arrive.